Shae Russell from mining.com.au. Sitting next to me is Mr. Data Dan Petri, and we are coming to you from Brisbane today because we have just had the most fascinating conversation with a couple of blokes, just a couple of ordinary blokes to me, in the coal industry in Queensland. But I believe you actually know who these guys are.
Yeah, so we had a great conversation with the chairman of mining program Wechsel and former NRL great Darren Lockyer, Mr. Lockyer, I should say, has become quite a shrewd businessman since leaving the NRL and retiring, and is now, he's invested in a number of businesses, but he's a board member of jobsformining.com.au, which is a fantastic initiative to get young people working in the resources sector. It was a great conversation because we not only spoke about the value of this particular, mainly metallurgical coal and its role in the state, we also touched on a few of the royalties, challenges facing the industry, and obviously that has to be discussed, so there does become a political dynamic in this election cycle. But again, we also got an insight really from Darren Lockyer, who's, as I said, he travels a length and breadth and has quite a good read on what really is going on in these outback and regional communities. So it was a great chat, and they were fantastic to get on board today.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and one of my key takeaways from this conversation, I hope everybody watching has a similar takeaway, is how critical coal mining is to Queensland, and this isn't something you can just rip out of the economy without having flow-on effects.
No, it's really kind of one of those topics which, outside the state of Queensland, like how much does it really move the dial? Well, in this part of the world, and really for the Australian economy, it generates enormous royalties, it generates enormous business taxation, and it often can get overshadowed by the iron ore story, but metallurgical coal, the quality of metallurgical coal for steel making purposes is amongst the best in the world coming out of Queensland, that Moranbah region. So that's up in Mackay. That's an incredibly important story to tell. We did discuss in this chat about whether the industry was perhaps a little bit slow to talk about the importance of the industry and its role going forward. We often talk about coal as a broad thematic, but really what we should be talking about is the different types of coal and the role it plays going forward. So that was quite interesting to hear what Grant Wechsel especially had to say about that.
It was a fascinating conversation to listen to, and I'm so glad that I got to be here to be part of it. But now I think you guys should go watch it and you tell us what you think. Mining.com.au is sitting down with Grant Wechsel, Darren Lockyer and Data Dan Petri. Everybody, thank you so much for having a very unusual conversation today. Something I'm quite passionate about, which you don't hear many people in Victoria say, is coal. Now, we've flown up to Brisbane. I've flown up to Brisbane. Let's talk about the importance of coal to the Queensland economy. Now, Mr. Data Dan, I know you've got some talking points here and you absolutely want to kick off this conversation today. I'm going to let you lead with the first question.
Well, the first question really is, we can talk about the raw numbers. I'll start with you first, Grant. The export sales revenues of coal are anywhere between $7 to $10 billion monthly. In terms of the overall scheme of the contribution of coal into this state, I'm going to ask you two things. Define what type of coal Queensland specialises in, and the economic, input of that particular commodity into the state.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think that's a good starting point because the industry probably didn't tell that story that well in the past. So about 70% of Queensland's coal is hard coking coal, or some people call it metallurgical coal. So that's exported to make steel, and obviously steel underpins everything that's built infrastructure-wise here and abroad in the other economies that it's exported to. So probably that's the starting point to differentiate from thermal coal, which is obviously for the power generation electricity supply, which is still a part of the Queensland setup, but more prominent in New South Wales. The thermal coal market is huge in New South Wales.
To add to that, I guess, is the quality of that met coal here in Queensland too. It's some of the best in the world.
So just on the met coal export markets, the easy one to say is China, but the series here in Queensland in terms of the scenario is a little bit more nuanced than that. I mean, with the history, I'm inclined to think it's more a Queensland-Japan play more so than Queensland-China. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, Japan have been involved in the Queensland coal industry for decades, 30, 40 years, and I think a lot of large Japanese steel players and companies are actually minority shareholders in a lot of the mines in Queensland. So that's a big export market, and obviously India's become another big market for the met coal product out of Queensland as well.
Just on the Queensland experience, like we're obviously on in an election period at the moment. Regional Queensland is really, it's a gigantic engine room for the state. Darren, I'll come to you. I mean, you're a board member, you're a businessman. You do have a lot of interests going up along the eastern seaboard. When you look at regional Queensland and the mining story, just how critical is it?
Oh, it's very critical. You know, I come from regional Queensland I grew up out there. Obviously, didn't understand the importance of it then, but you know, you saw a lot of high vis people going around in those areas. I've got my wife's from Mackay. I've got family members that still work in the mining sector. So, and with our Mining Pro business, when we go to regional Queensland, you go to these regional towns, and you know, when the commodity prices are up, you know, these little towns are thriving. And then when you go through these, I remember when we were going through a bit of a bust time for the mining sector, you know, there was a lot of these regional towns on their knees, you know, just like ghost towns. So it's enormous industry for, you know, obviously the economy here in Queensland, but those regional towns especially. And when you live in the cities, I think for a lot of people, I don't think they understand how important it is to those regional towns if you don't actually go out and see what it means to them.
Well, just on the regional towns and in terms of the city, the Queensland state budget was also handed down early this year. Big royalty windfall to the state, $15 billion. I think it's been conservative in terms of what came with Treasury coffers. How much do you have a quantum in terms of, you know, the likes of, you know, like, obviously both of you spend a lot of time within the industry. I mean, do you get any kind of anecdotes in terms of what some of the major players pay in terms of royalties to the state government?
Oh, not directly. I mean, obviously the bigger listed companies and things disclose the royalty payments they've made, but even in general, just in terms of revenue for the state, I know that you take BHP and they have the BMA coal assets.
So that's BHP, Mitsubishi.
Yep,
that's
the mines. I think they're something like 9% of Queensland's revenue. So obviously they're paying a huge royalty bill, but I couldn't tell you what the exact number is. No. But yeah, it certainly had a big impact on the coal industry here in Queensland.
And in terms of the economy, both of you are involved in jobs for mining. Grant, you're the chair. Darren, you're a board member. In terms of that capability, in terms of resourcing, in terms of getting product to port, I mean, we talk about jobs for mining, like it's an incredibly important sector in terms of those skills. For example, what type of skills do you look for if you were to get, you know, engineers or surveyors? Like, are they the types of skills you're after, or do you have to do quite a long process?
Well, you've got, you know, our business, Mining Pro, is focused on the actual operations in a coal mine. So everyone driving the dump trucks, the big yellow trucks, for those who aren't in the industry, that people see around, to all the different maintenance trades, your engineers, supervision surveyors, all the kind of white collar and technical roles that support it. I think there's, you know, rough numbers, about 34,000 coal direct jobs in Queensland, but I think I've seen Coal Australia quoting that there's something in the range of 300,000 jobs that are supported by the coal
so that multiplier
industry in Australia. So you take on that whole supply chain. And back to your point earlier about when we have seen downturns in the coal industry, places like Mackay, you know, I moved back 2012, 2013, when there was a real downturn in the industry, and you had, you know, more mining spec utes parked up near the airport than you could see, you know, as far as the eye could see. So it is, the flow-on effect from the industry is huge, and it's not something that can be replaced, you know, quickly or easily as far as Queensland's economy goes.
You know, I remember, you know, in Moranbah once, coming out of where we were staying at the hotel, we were looking for a coffee, and you go down to the local bakery and there's a lineup, you know, it's, you know, 20 people, and then you go to the local McDonald's and there's cars parked back from, you know, 20, 30 metres, because this is the flow-on effect of these people that work in these mines that are putting money back into these local towns.
So just on the local towns and just on the industry more broadly, do you think, coal, and especially coal in particular, has been flat-footed in selling this story. I mean, from where I stand, I mean, the numbers are very strong, but more often than not, you do get caught up in the issue of how it plays in environmental concerns. Has the industry not been as strong and forthright in selling its positive news story? Darren, might start with you if that's okay.
I think there's, as Grant said before, I think a lot of people are not educated about the industry, and I think that's what Jobs for Mining communities is about. It's about saying how important the industry is to these regional areas, but also at the same time taking people on an educational piece where, that 70% of the coal in Australia is used for building, making steel. So we need that, whether we're building high rises, infrastructure. So I think a lot of people just put coal in the basket of, thermal, and I don't think people fully understand that that's not the case.
Grant, guys.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's probably, the amount that the industry is speaking up for itself now, it probably should have started 10 years ago, because the pressure that came on from Adani and things like that happening was quite specifically aimed at one company, and I think a lot of the industry weren't kind of feeling the effects of that. The royalty stuff has obviously pushed the coal miners to speak up for themselves as well, and obviously, Nick Jules and his team formed Coal Australia, and lots of the independent coal companies have now got this industry body to speak up for themselves. So I don't think it's that the Minerals Council and the Queensland Resources Council and people didn't speak about coal in the past, but it was often quite reactive, and they weren't really on the front foot going back a period of time to educate people, like Darren's saying, because I don't think the vast majority of the population, especially in regional Queensland, have any issue with coal mining. I think the survey they've done recently, it's got 90% plus support in Mackay and Gladstone and Rockhampton, these big regional centres, that they understand that coal mining is critical to their economy now and into the future.
Could we ask if this sort of laying low approach that's being taken by the coal industry is going to hurt its prospects going forward? Like, as you've pointed out in earlier conversations, that haven't been part of the royalty conversation, they wanted to take a step back. Does this hurt their ambitions going forward?
I don't think that they didn't want to be a part of the royalty conversation. I think there was, no consultation with industry about the royalty. So that's certainly driven, as I said, the industry to speak up for itself. And you've seen the CEOs of many of the major coal companies come and speak specifically about the royalties. So I think there's two different things. One, they should have kind of clarified as an industry, what they do and the benefits they're providing the economy, but also just the basics of what our coal is used for, and so that people are familiar with the industry. But certainly on the royalty front, that's made them stand up and speak out for themselves, quite urgently.
Just on the royalty issue, so for viewers watching, it's a case where progressive royalties tiers were introduced. It's probably fair to say that there has been a margin crunch on there. With a view on the election, what would you say, for example, would be the message from industry more broadly? I'm not asking you to speak for industry, but rather saying that, what would you say to both sides, major parties likely to form, one of them is likely to form government, about the royalty issue?
Yeah, I think you have to have consultation with industry. You can't have, no consultation with companies that are supplying 9% of the revenue of the state, let alone all the, mid-tier and specialist coal players. It's a huge investment to start a coal mine. It's a huge operational budget to run one, and to introduce the world's highest coal royalty scheme without consultation, I think, is a no-brainer that whoever's in power, needs to be consulting with industry.
Just for the government might say, or someone, who believes that it's justified, these are the resources that belong to the people of Queensland. To clarify and to get this perfect, the industry, as I understand, is more than happy to pay its own way, but I think we need probably to hear the industry already pays a significant amount of tax. And
yeah, I think the industry has always paid its way, and I certainly don't have any figures on tax, but if you take in all forms of tax federally and state-wise, obviously the mining industry across Australia is basically the backbone of our economy. So I think most people are familiar with that, and the coal miners are all happy to pay their share, just like the iron ore miners or the other industries, I think it's about it being
Fair and reasonable.
and allows investment, and remembering that mining commodities fluctuate in price. So you've got the good times and the bad times, and you need to be able to work through those cycles. I mean, I've heard anecdotally stories of miners having to pay royalties in one half of the financial year and needing to prop up their financing for the second half of the year. So it doesn't seem to be balanced. And I know the cost side of the industry, the supply chain cost has gone through the roof. So people aren't making money at the points that they used to. So whether there's a way for whoever's going to be in office to, be indexing it or looking at the different price points at which it happens, I think that it definitely needs consultation with industry to come up with something that works for everyone.
Now, in light of that, I do have to ask you about projects of significance on the horizon. Is there anything that to report, or has this actually had a material impact?
In terms of new supply, as far as new coal mines,
Yes.
There has been very little activity in that space. I mean, I think approval-wise, there's been a lot of red tape from government to actually get new projects off the ground, excluding the royalty piece. You add the royalty piece to the mix, and I think that people are potentially sitting back and waiting to see what happens if there's a change of government. There was a new hard coking coal mine that opened up this year, the Old Downs mine up in Queensland, but all the other M&A activity has all been just change of ownership of existing assets, as you've seen some of the bigger players get out of the coal industry and they've been replaced with foreign ownership or different groups.
So in light of that, and this comes probably to your point, Darren, if the project runs out or you get to mine life, then we've got a supply shortage. And I'll come back to the mining for jobs piece in as well. If we have a capability gap there, a supply shortage within a decade, you've got an industry that faces some very serious and acute challenges if it's not profitable. Is that a fair assessment? That's probably one for both.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the risk here, is that if the industry disappears from not just Queensland's economy, but in particular those regional areas, and there'll be a lot of businesses, a lot of jobs that'll go, and that you'll have towns that'll turn into ghost towns. And I said we've seen it before where the commodity prices are down and there's not a lot of activity, and it just sucks the life out of those regional areas.
Yeah.
And just with those regional areas and the commodity prices which we were just talking about, if that comes, I don't want to say if that comes to pass, but I'll rephrase and say that prices do fluctuate. That's ultimately really been the kind of invisible, I don't want to say the invisible hand of Adam Smith, but more the fact that if you do look at the tea leaves overseas, for example, that's not exactly what I would call a boom market, particularly in places such as China. They've got some enormous challenges there. Do you look at when you're obviously focused here in the state, but do you look at what's going on offshore as well in terms of near-term challenges you have to also factor in?
Oh, I know our clients do. I mean, obviously they're the ones with the customers who are ultimately taking the product, and then that flows down to the operations here, and so we're more aware of it through our client base. But certainly those challenges have an impact on price as well. And ultimately, if we don't have new supply come on, it potentially is going to increase coal prices if there's a lack of supply too. So it's going to affect competition in this space.
I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the jobs in the sector. As you talk about it, it's an important employer of the state. And we'll start with you, Darren, and I'll come back to you, Grant. How do you attract young people to a sector that is effectively impacted by the boom and bust cycles? You talk about country towns drying up, regional areas driving up. How do you convince young kids to come into this industry and stay in what is a great industry to work in?
Oh, I think for a lot of people, it obviously pays well. So I think that for a lot of people that are looking to save for their first house, that's one of the carrots, is that this industry is obviously not for everyone, but I think that's probably, and there's obviously learning a trade out of it, but I think there's a lot of people that find themselves coming out to these sites where they need to get a start in life.
For sure. I think that the industry has, not really struggled to attract young people from regional areas. So if you're going to go out and operate the equipment, if you're going to become a a diesel fitter or an electrician and get a trade. It's a pretty common path, and you'll find that whether it's Gladstone or Emerald or Mackay or even Townsville, places like that, that there's pretty strong supply from young people. What I think became an issue was technical skills. So not enough kids doing mining engineering at university, not enough geologists, all those kind of things. And in fact, many of the universities dropped their mining engineering course, so you actually had to do a civil engineering degree and then try and do a specialisation in mining. So considering it's the backbone of the economy and there's an endless amount of jobs required in that space, that's where that getting back to telling the story piece and telling people it's okay to be a mining engineer. And of course, that's not just for coal mining. There's gold and base metals and all the critical minerals. And in fact, anyone who's on the electrification story knows that mining is a critical factor in that as well. So just, I think there'll be a resurgence in people, young people coming through that path again.
How much could someone earn? Like, I happen to know an out of shape journalist who could be. I'm talking about me.
Yeah, I think for the operators and trades is anywhere from kind of 130,000 to 180,000 type salary ranges are quite common, and then obviously supervision and technical people are above that. The other thing is most people work 7 days on and 7 days off, so there's the idea that you work half the year, but they do big hours and shift work and all those kind of things as well. So factor that in, but at least there's plenty of people fishing off your home in Gladstone on their days off.
I want to stay on this subject just for one more time. And a lot of people, when they're coming out of school and they're looking for essentially job security, so you're talking about learning a trade. Obviously, mine's open and close happens all the time, but can young people today enjoy a long career in the coal mining space?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think the perception has been that you haven't and that we're somehow going to have to replace these jobs. But if you look at the hard coke and coal assets we're talking about, the ones that BMA have and that Glencore have and all these majors that are in the industry still, they go for decades and decades to come. And I think if they push approvals, I think one of them, potentially Blackwater, that was sold to Whitehaven, had something like a 90-year life beyond, if they were to keep expanding it, right? So it's obviously there's many factors, there's supply and demand and changes in technology and things going forward. But if you're a young person now, I think reinforcing to them that there is a long career and decades of work in the coke and coal sector would be easy to do.
And bakeries obviously do quite well. Bakeries and McDonald's franchise would do
Local
quite
pubs.
well.
That's what we
hotels.
That's right.
with our Jobs for Mining campaign, we actually got Sam Thaiday was dressed up as a chef and a nurse and a teacher, and because all these jobs, the flow-on jobs in those towns, wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the mining industry supporting those.
So how did, notwithstanding the present company, but how did the NRL players, I mean, these are pretty big names. I mean, Ben Hunt, I think, is still playing, and Sam Thaiday. I mean, how did these guys get involved?
Well, obviously, having Darren on the board helped, but the link between rugby league and mining in Queensland and New South Wales is very strong, right? I think Queensland has so many regional towns that are involved in mining, and the passion out there is rugby league. It's not in the city we split our focus between rugby league and AFL and rugby union and all these football and all these different sports, but you go out there and it's just rugby league heartland. So getting some of those people who grew up in those areas to tell the story that, hey, actually my dad's a coal miner, in the case of Ben Hunt. I know we had Tamika Upton from the NRLW. She grew up in Blackwater and Emerald, like proper coal mining towns, and her family, uncles, are still working in underground mines. Just getting that story to resonate with people that it's okay to work in the mining industry, and also that how critical the industry is for these communities to thrive, which Darren touched on earlier, was really why we went down the path of having the rugby league players tell the story to get the eyeballs on.
Right. So in terms of the big picture, what would you like to see for the industry going forward? Just greater emphasis on being part of that conversation as it is a positive industry, as you were saying, or perhaps a bit more urgencies in some of these projects, which probably could use some regulatory certainty. I'll be diplomatic there for the politicians, but
Yeah, I think that all comes together, right? If you've got a public that's supportive of the industry and the fact that they recognise that these communities are built on the back of mining, and then we have government, policy that has some certainty to it, we can keep the projects going, we can keep jobs going. It all connects. So from our point of view, doing the Jobs for Mining Communities campaign was an easy start to the process because it's not hard to convince people that these jobs are important to the regions.
I want to know how we get politicians to listen. How do we get them to start having, especially politicians that are city-based and that are disconnected from regional areas, what conversations need to be started to make sure that they're actually listening to not just the concerns of the industry, but the concerns of the communities that will be impacted by this?
Well, I think starting these governing, these industry bodies like Coal Australia has obviously been formed to promote the coal industry. You've got the Queensland Resources Council here, the Minerals Council Australia. Those type of bodies are doing most of the legwork in terms of the advocacy and the engagement with politicians. But even privately, I've hosted a coal industry event now for the last 3 years, which we did because nobody was doing it and speaking up for the industry. And this year we had a fantastic turnout. Mainly LNP politicians, but we did have some there from other parties. So I think just the more we speak up, the more engagement there'll be, and we go from there.
I think going out to these communities and talking to those people that live in these communities would be, I know that the politicians go and they're in that election mode now. They go out, but I think you've got to hear it from the people that live there. And the campaign that JMC is running at the moment is you see the billboards up here in the cities, but that's just to highlight, for a lot of people here that might in the cities that are against mining, that you need to understand what it means to the people that live in those regional communities because it's the backbone of their towns.
And also critical to holding up our buildings.
Yes. Yeah.
No mining, no buildings.
I've probably got one last question for me. In light of that comment about, I suppose, we city dwellers, in your experience, and I say this to both of you both got interests in other businesses as well, is there any industry scale capable of replacing coal at this stage?
No, well, at that event that we hosted in August, one of the panelists told a great story about, I think in 2022, 2023, the coal industry contributed about $100 billion to the Australian economy, so including the New South Wales coal mining as well. If you add up, I think it was general agriculture, beef, tourism and foreign students, so education market, the four industries together don't meet the coal industry. So, just to give an idea of the size and scale, I thought it was a great anecdote of how important the industry is. If you look at other commodities, there's been a big push for critical minerals and vanadium and things up near Mount Isa. That is fantastic because the world's changing, but it's not going to replace 34,000 direct jobs and 300,000 in the supply chain. It's just not the scale or the size of the mines that are there. So I think people need to realise that it's not a sunset industry, as we were talking about before, about decades to come. There needs to be proactive investment and support in the industry now and to keep that going.
Darren, do you have a comment on that?
It's significant, right? So, and I think we've got to remember that 70% of the coal that we're digging out of the ground here in Queensland is being used to create steel, to build infrastructure.
Future-proof.
How much steel we're going to use to build what we need to build here for the Olympics in 2032. I think we need to sort of remind people about that. And I understand, the world is changing. We've got to move to other minerals, and I get that. But to just sort of turn the tap off with this industry, it would have a massive impact. So I think there's a way of being fair and reasonable, which is I think what the people that own these mines, they just want to work with government and be fair and reasonable, so that the jobs can stay, the direct jobs and the indirect jobs can stay. So all these regional areas can still, improve what they have.
It's very pragmatic answers, I think, from both.
It certainly is. This isn't an industry that's going away overnight, as you explained before. There's many decades ahead for it. Listen, thank you so much for today's conversation. Look, I could probably sit here for another hour and talk about it.
They're looking at their watches.
Yeah, they've had enough now. No, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation. As I said, I'm very interested in coal and the role it plays in the Australian economy. I know you and I have these conversations off the cuff as well. But also I'd just like to put it out there, if you're looking for somebody to drive a truck, I love big machinery. Love driving things. Love driving anything big. So if you'll ever let me behind one of those big, massive, $7 million Caterpillar beasts, I'm your girl.
Well, to start with, you should come up just for a site visit and hop in one of our trucks at one of our projects and have a look around. It'd be a good story in the meantime.
I will absolutely do that. I need no encouragement. I got the high vis at home, boots ready to get dirty. Let's go.
What are they earning now?
To drive a truck?
Yeah.
130,000, 140,000. Depends on the site, obviously different commodities and things, but in the coal sector.
And how long does it take for someone to get up and running in there?
Well, there's a lot of new to industry programs now. So you talked about young people before. So there's a heap of people being trained up, and generally to drive a truck is the first piece of equipment that you operate. So you get trained up on the truck, and then after that you've got dozers and graders, and the really big excavators, and the ultimate in coal mining is the big drag lines and that type of thing. So you've got a pathway there, but usually over a kind of 6 to 12 month period, you'll have trainees come in and be trained up on the dump trucks.
I was going to end the conversation, but I'm not. Let's just focus on the path to employment. It's really quite quick here. So you talked about new to the industry. Within 6 months or 12 months, I could be driving. Maybe there's a late in life career change coming for me, but you get upskilled that quickly to be making quite a lot of money.
Yeah, and it depends on the mine side of the program, and there's kind of new to industry traineeships versus formal. You can go through a longer kind of 2-year program at some of the mines, but it's a lot quicker than people think. And generally, if you have some kind of background in, say you've operated smaller equipment, civil equipment, or you're mechanically minded in some way, that helps in terms of the aptitude of picking it up quickly. But in saying that, there's plenty of people into the industry with zero experience at all, and it's a pretty quick turnaround. Generally, they are on a lower salary than that while they're being trained up, but to convert to that full salary is a pretty quick process.
Jobsformining.com.
Pretty simple.
.au?
Yep.
There we are. Jobs, that's the plug. Jobsformining.com.
Yeah, that was completely accidental on my part as well.
I thought we were running hot, so there we are.
Yeah, no, well done.
All right, that's it from me.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Cheers.